Welcome to the Cupbearer to the King podcast. The podcast where we delve deep into the heart of the land of Lincoln's trades and manufacturing landscape. We draw inspiration from an unexpected source, the book of Nehemiah. Just as Nehemiah rebuilt the walls in Jerusalem, we're here to rebuild and strengthen the foundation of the Illinois trades and manufacturing sector. Together, with a few of my friends, we're on a mission to explore the state's industrial heartbeat, discussing the challenges, innovations, and opportunities that define the Illinois skilled workforce. So grab your hard hat, put on your safety glasses, and let's dive into the blue-collar world where grit meets skill. Hello and welcome to the Cupbearer for the King podcast. I've got some friends here that I'd like to introduce. Lynn Breer, and Lynn is the Director of Institutional Research. Sorry.
That's okay.
I was so close.
You were.
Institutional Research at Lakeland College. That's what happens when you're thinking about what you're going to say before you finish what you actually said.
Yep.
And Bonnie Moore, who is the Director to the Center for Business and Industry at Lakeland College as well. We thought we'd open up the inaugural podcast and just talk about what's going on with manufacturing and education in the state of Illinois. And right now, it's not looking good. I've got out in front of me a report from the IMA Education Foundation, Illinois Manufacturing Association Education Foundation, that they did back in 2021. I thought we'd walk through some of the bullet points and just talk about, and you guys can tell me your experiences and how that fits in, and begin to look at how do we make some positive changes to the problems that we've got with Illinois manufacturing and trades. So the first thing here was there's a lack of interest in careers in manufacturing across the demographics, from students to parents to adult learners. And I know, Lynn, you can address some of this. You just got done doing a survey of several high schools.
Yep. We did some focus groups with about 4 or 5 high schools in our district, and we talked to over 200 students probably during that process. And it was really interesting to see how their perspective of Lakeland College was not a trade school. It's just a school that you come and then you get your gen eds and then you transfer. Because we had a handful of students who were planning to go to trade schools outside of our district, either in another state or something like that. And the other issue that was really brought up was they really I don't feel they see manufacturing as a valid career field. And the other big issue, of course, is their fear of the cost of college and the debt that would be incurred, because that was across the board. We talked to students who were planning to go to college, who were not planning to go to college, and then there were a handful that were on the fence. And across the board in every group, it was the cost and the fear of having so much debt that it would take them forever to pay off that college experience. So from my perspective, after those discussions, I really thought what we need to be doing a better job of is promoting how there are alternatives to the 4-year school that could give you the benefit of a very well-paying job where you could support a family and would get you a lot of advantages. But there's a lot of technical aspects to the current manufacturing in today's world. And we need to kind of push some of that too, and I don't think we're doing a good enough job of that.
So you had a chance to talk to a lot of high school students. I know, Bonnie, you deal with a lot of adult learners. Are you seeing the same type of thing?
I am. I kind of have an interesting group of folks that I work with, because I do work with business partners, adult learners, and then last summer we partnered to do Teens with Tools, which was a program specifically for middle school students. So I'm getting a different perspective maybe than what Lynn was able to get from her findings, but there's been a big push over the last 10 years or so to expose kids or young people to careers in manufacturing. And that's been very successful, although it's kind of backslid post-pandemic as priorities have shifted. But we are missing a large number of people in that conversation, and that is parents and adult learners. So we're bringing younger people in and exposing them very generally to careers in manufacturing so that they can see that plants and manufacturing facilities are clean and they're safe places to work and they're bright and they're great paying jobs and those types of things. but we're not doing a very good job talking about what those jobs are and what those job functions are and how similar they are to the things that younger people are using in their daily technology. Coding versus programming PLCs, similar skill sets. And if you like one, you're probably going to like the other. But making the connection to the career based on the skill set is not there. And then also bringing in parents. I mean, I worked in manufacturing. I went into manufacturing in 2013, and I can remember how angry and upset my dad in particular was because he didn't send his daughter to college to go work in a factory.
Right.
Okay.
And there was a bad perception about that. So now this has been 10 years, and I was able, before I left manufacturing, to bring my dad into the plant because his experience had been manufacturing in the late 60s, early 70s. And he was able to see that they are great and safe places to work. I think also there's a little bit of a perception, particularly on the adult side of things, that jobs in manufacturing are going away and being replaced with automation. And I feel very strongly that that's a misperception. The jobs that are coming to manufacturing are also higher skilled and higher paying positions than somebody that may, be working on a manual assembly line. There's a higher skill set that's required for those positions, which means that they're paying more money. So I think we could do a better job having conversations around what is automation, what does it do in a facility. It's not meant to replace a person. It's meant to make a process more efficient, and it's meant to make a process more safe, or whatever the reasons are for implementing the automation in those locations, because there's a misunderstanding really on society's part about that in general.
No, I agree. I know I came out of manufacturing as well, and I was fortunate enough to be in the automation side of things. And I don't know, I thought it was fascinating to go in and find ways to make things run more efficiently, and you could get products that were better than what they were 2 weeks ago. Everybody was happy then because your consumers got better stuff. You were able to produce goods with less waste, and that lowers the price. But we see that there's a big push for more automation just for the reasons you talked about, especially as the wages go up. It's more important than ever for us to be more efficient or more effective or add value, as I say a lot.
I think this is a really complicated and complex conversation to have,
Right.
because you're talking about a reduction in overall population, then you're adding in out-migration from the state of Illinois, which is impacting the number of workers. You're adding in an aging workforce, which again is impacting the number of available workers. You're talking about a large number of young people in particular who are migrating out of the state. And then you add in the perception of cost of college versus the value of college. And we are finding a lot of our employers are willing to pay for tuition and fees for students, whether that's through a registered apprenticeship program or through a tuition reimbursement
Well, and what
program.
they're talking about kind of comes into their point number 2 here. It says employers face unprecedented challenges in both identifying and recruiting potential employees. Used to be you could put an ad in a newspaper because everybody read the newspaper.
Right.
And now there's no newspaper to put an ad in. And if you put a targeted Facebook ad, who are you targeting? So it gets really difficult. I know, Lynn, you've sit in on some of the DACM panels, and you got a chance to hear from the technicians and the employers as well.
Yes, and they talk a lot about retention as an issue, as well as recruitment, and not being able to get the bodies that they need with the skills that they need. But they're willing to train people to get those skills because they're at the point where that's what they need. They're in such need of good workers with skills that they're willing to do that through apprenticeships or even schooling, but also to do some of that on the job as well. But yeah, they're really struggling to recruit and retain the workforce that they need.
We've seen some really innovative things coming from employers around recruitment and retention. outside of additional wages. I mean, you're getting into a slippery slope when you get into wage wars with your neighbor down the road.
Right.
So we've seen a lot of innovative ideas from workforce in general, but in particular in the manufacturing side, and offering flex shifts where people can work in 2-hour increments or 4-hour increments, or people can work weekends only, or where they're offering additional benefits to people who are willing to pick up other shifts. And it's been interesting and refreshing to see that, but it all kind of boils back down to the fact that we're running low on people, and our employers are getting very burned out, and it is the existing workforce as well getting burned out, because there's nothing worse than training, and nobody stays.
Right.
But we have employers who are really willing to do the work and make the investment in the employee to stay in the workplace. And these things were happening pre-pandemic, but they were definitely exacerbated by COVID. And no one could really plan for a pandemic, but we knew this population decline was coming.
Which kind of comes to their point number 3 on their thing. It says employers are facing significant challenges in retention and in planning for retirement. Several regions across the state will be experiencing an above average percentage of retirements in the coming 5 to 10 years. But you mentioned retention, and that's a huge problem now, like you said, with the out-migration that we have as well. And that's putting a huge strain on, will manufacturing in Illinois even survive if we can't do something to turn this thing around?
And keep people here that we need to keep here for the skill sets that they have. Yeah.
So number 4 on their list here is there's an overlap and or silos of services and programs targeted to support and address workforce needs that unfortunately create gaps in services for both employers and employees. So where Eastern Illinois University may be doing one thing and Lakeland is doing another thing, but we're not working together using the best things we have at Lakeland and the best things we have at Eastern. And I'm using that as an example. I don't actually know any, but where we're kind of competing against each other instead of spreading out those things. Hey, why don't you guys do the best things you possibly can, and we'll do the best things we possibly can, so that those services are spread out a little more evenly. And I don't know if you guys have any comment on that, or even between community colleges.
There's a lot of conversation around that.
There is. Yeah.
I mean, geographically, community colleges have always been somewhat competitive with one another, and holding on to folks who live or work in their district and not wanting them to go down the road, even if it's closer, or to a program that might be a better fit for them. Like, I'm thinking, for example, going through a diesel program versus going through John Deere, a John Deere program. Would you if you're going to be a John Deere tech, you would probably rather go to a John Deere program. But if you live in Champaign, you're going to just go to the diesel program at Parkland versus coming to Lakeland. So those things do still exist. There is conversation around creating some standardized curriculum for in-demand industries across community colleges. I do have fears myself and some concerns about doing that. I think that it makes sense to do that to an extent, because electric basics is electric basics, right? HVAC is HVAC on a basic level. But then you start talking about different materials, commercial versus residential. You start talking about CNC machining of metals versus plastics. They become very different things. So if you could create a program where there's a base standard of curriculum that's available at every community college, and then you could add in specializations on top of that based on what's in the region, to me, that makes sense. Because, what my job is customized training. So everyone that comes to me doesn't want a basic generic program.
Right.
So when we start talking about standardizing curriculum, I get nervous about it, because that's not what our employers want, and that's not necessarily what our workforce needs.
So would you say that your employers, when they come to you, are they looking to retrain their people?
Sometimes they would be looking to retrain or upskill somebody. It might be a case where they're taking somebody who's working in an entry-level job that's showing promise in a mechanical area, for example, that they're wanting to upskill that person so they could move into a maintenance role. Or sometimes it's a situation where they've had an employee that just needs training on new equipment because they've purchased something that requires a different skill set than what they have. So it's across the board. When I came to Lakeland 9 years ago, what we did was very specialized training, and it was very particular towards industrial maintenance techs. So it was people who had a base skill set that needed to hone a skill most of the time. And that has really shifted in the last 9 years because we have seen more of a need for basic introductory training versus doing something for a more skilled labor workforce. Now that need still exists, but we can't stop the bleeding without doing the basic training first.
Right.
So now there's both levels that are needed.
Yep, there sure is.
And Lynn, you've been involved in several grants I know of. Are those competitive, school to school?
Some of them are competitive. Some of them are competitive school to school. And if it's a lot of times, if it's state funding through the Illinois Community College Board, it goes to everybody. So it kind of depends on what kind of grant we're applying for, and where the funding source streams from. If it's a federal grant, then they're usually competitive. If it's federal feed through money, then sometimes it's every college is offered a certain amount of money, and you have to just say, this is how we're going to use the money. Or if it's state money that says, well, we're going to fund allied health programs because we're really low on nurses and EMTs in every community across the state, then that's where the money goes.
So have you seen some grants that particularly would have been for the trades or manufacturing that were successful?
Yes, there are some that are there are a lot of them that are successful, and we've applied for a couple of them, but we won't know if we get them or not for a while. But there are some out there, and there are some out there that are really focused on rural areas, which is where we are focused, because we are in a very rural area and we cover a lot of square miles, which is part of some of our barriers that we can encounter. But we've submitted a couple of them recently. One is a federal grant that hopefully we'll get, but it's for high school. It's K through 12 kinds of approaches to kind of bring in trades and manufacturing, and to kind of focus on that and to kind of build those skill sets. And it would be working with basically a lot of the high schools in the community. And I'm hoping that we'll get that one. And we have I think a good chance because they do have to spend 25% of their funding on rural areas. So that gives us kind of a step up. So you got to kind of look at those kinds of aspects we look at those kinds of aspects when we're approaching grants, because that does give us a step up.
So do you think that the state of Illinois realizes that we've got a problem with manufacturing?
I think they do, yes.
I know they do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just over the last year, I've been able to get involved in some community college board workforce groups, and a couple of other boards that support community colleges and continuing education and adult learning that I wasn't a part of prior to the last year. There's a huge push right now on a statewide level and also federally to try to fund particularly trade careers. Mm-hmm. And manufacturing, of course, is at the forefront of that, especially as we dealt with supply chain issues and we've felt the pain that we had never really felt as Americans before in trying to figure out how do we bring manufacturing back to the States, do it in a way that's sustainable, but also environmentally sound and with the workforce that we have here. So I do think that we'll continue to see an influx of grant dollars coming down to support learning in technology and those trades.
And I think the workforce needs really drive that a lot, because we see, if you look at some of the workforce data that's out there, and it's a lot of the areas where we are low that are really growth areas, that they're like, these are bright outlook areas. They're really focused on manufacturing and skill-based. It's all the skill-based areas that are in high need, not necessarily the white collar jobs as I guess opposed to.
So that's one of my
that.
fears with AI coming in, that a lot of the white collar jobs might be outsourced to AI. I know I've used it myself to help me write some different things. And if you can't do some of the analysis and stuff with AI, but it's really hard to fix a machine with AI.
There's so many ethical concerns around AI that will be interesting to see how
How
all
we
this
deal with
fleshes
it.
out
Yes.
in the next couple of years.
I think that's part of our issue is we don't think about that soon enough, and then we get ourselves into trouble sometimes.
Right.
And AI can give you great information, but if you don't have the skill set to analyze what they're
Right.
putting out, I met with a group of high school juniors and seniors on Monday that were pitching a business plan for a class business, and they generated their business plan with AI, and it was so easy to throw darts across it.
Right.
And I felt kind of bad because they were really excited that they had generated this document, but it literally said in their first line that their goal was to bring $15,000 in revenue in from their business. But nowhere did they discuss how much they were going to sell tickets for, how many tickets they had to sell, what was that their profit, was that their net? And it sparked a lot of conversation, but it became glaringly obvious to me that students are relying on AI to provide them with fancy words and pretty
Right,
documents and not really understanding what it says.
And not really looking at it analytically
Yes.
to figure out where the problems are and that it's missing these 5 pieces.
You know what? This would be a great topic all by itself.
Oh,
Yes, it
where we
would.
could spend. We may have to do that here soon. 'Cause
I think we all know the three of us could get together and
Yes,
talk
to
about anything
everything
for a long time.
Yep.
All right, number 5. The current skills gap goes deeper than the skills needed for manufacturing industry to transition to Industry 4.0. Today's skill gap leads to the significant remediation needs in the subject of basic math, reading literacy, and essential soft skills. And what are your experience with that? Is this an accurate representation?
Absolutely, because I'm sure Bonnie can reinforce this, but every industry partner we have talked to with grants, every industry we have talked to lately have all focused on the soft skills, dependability, people showing up, showing to work up on time. The soft skills are such an issue, and communication would fall into those soft skills. And I think that's a major issue that we are facing too with our younger workforce, or even not even just the younger workforce, but how the younger workforce interacts with the older workforce, because there are very different perspectives. And how do we kind of smooth that transition and help them understand how to communicate more effectively with each other? But yes, soft skills are a huge issue. And then in terms of remediation, we have done a lot of work at the college in terms of trying to, and some of this is kind of forced on us by the state because we're not allowed to offer remedial math and English anymore. So you have to get them into their college level classes by the second semester of their first year. So we've done a lot of work with co-recs in terms of integrating the support they need for math, English, and reading into programs.
What's a co-rec?
A co-rec would be, you're going to go ahead and take your regular math class, you're going to take your stats class, your college algebra class, or your gen ed math class that you have to take for your program. And along with that, you have to take a 2-hour additional credits that would give you tutoring, the support you need, because you're not at the level, you're not testing into the level that you would need to really take that class and be successful.
So it's basically added time
It's
once the class
added
where you get
time.
extra help so
Right.
that you can get the skills that you need. All
right.
Lynn, and correct me if I cannot remember if I read this in your report in the board book or if this was from an article that Brian Lynch sent me, but something like 82% of students are testing into remedial math,
Yes.
and 90-something into reading, and that gap has gotten much larger.
It's we've seen that trend for over time. Math has always been, for us, it's been around 70% in this area. 70% are not ready to take a college level math class. They're not prepped for that. English and reading are lower than that, but yeah, there are issues along with that. English is usually around 20. We actually have increased that. 10 years ago, we were probably around 20%. Now we're probably 25 to 30% of our incoming students are not prepared to take a comp level, the comp 1 class where you write and things like that. So yeah, I think it is getting a little bit higher. It's getting a little worse. And I'm not sure how much the pandemic really impacted that. I know it helped. It didn't help, that's for sure.
I know on a K-12 level, in having conversations around that, there's been huge gaps, and those disparities between students who are testing in and students who are not have gotten much larger.
Yes.
Post-pandemic. And I do know this was from an article I got from Brian. That was a national statistic. But I was trying to remember exactly how many hours of remedial work they said had to be done per student to get them back up to speed. And I want to say it was something like a minimum of 29 additional hours.
That's probably not outside the realm of reality, because it depends on where they're testing, because there's at least probably for math alone, if they tested in at the lowest level, there would be 3 and 4 hour credits. I'm not sure how many they would be. So just to get to the level where they could take a gen ed math class, and I don't know that it would be at college algebra.
Right.
It comes back into the fear of college costing so
Yes.
much, because now you're paying even more money,
right?
Because you have to take more classes to get
And
even
those
ready for.
And those classes don't really count for anything. I mean,
Right.
those remedial classes don't necessarily count towards your.
So if you've got a degree that's 60 hours, you take a remedial class, that doesn't count towards that
No.
60 hours.
Right.
And you still have to pay for it.
Yeah, you still have to pay
Yes,
for it.
Right. I do think, though, that there's some really great things happening and some good conversations happening to try to solve those problems. We have some really great school districts here in the Lakeland College District that are active and having conversations with us about how can we work together to bridge the gap, not just in exposing kids to different careers, but also in, literally taking some of these students one-on-one and saying, what does this particular student need, and kind of approaching it from a case management style. And there is a lot of push, of course, coming down with legislation that's requiring even now middle school students to have experiential career learning. And I think that none of these things are going to be quick fixes. But these are things, when we talk about soft skills and we talk about remedial math, reading, writing, and those things, in time, these conversations are going to fix that. But it's not something we can just put a Band-Aid on.
Right.
It's going to be a long haul.
Yeah.
It's not an overnight fix.
It's going to take
It's a long time.
the colleges, the employers, the local municipalities themselves to all be a part of this.
And
But
the local school districts need to be an important part of that as well.
There's more people at the table participating in the conversation now than there ever
Right,
has been.
right.
And I feel like that's a really great thing because people do care.
Well, we got a couple minutes left. Let's talk about the last one they had on their list here. This is number 6. There are limitations on our public education institutions at all levels that prevent schools from being able to respond to employer workforce and training needs quickly. And I know that's exactly why your area was created.
Yeah, this is a
So
loaded
that we could, yeah.
question.
Well, would you say that statement is true?
I would unequivocally agree with that statement. We are requiring our K-12 educators to do so much more with so much less. And the expectation of K-12 educators to be teachers, nurses, parents, friends, mental health professionals, on and on and on, is just ludicrous in my opinion. This is my personal opinion I'm sharing here, so I will say that. But yes, that is absolutely true. And there are so many requirements and restrictions on education at this point that there is no flexibility and opportunity to get kids exposed to career exploration, at least in a school day in the way that it exists today.
Well, Lynn, I don't know. You've been involved at the very front end of curriculums being developed. Any idea how long it takes from the time they do the DACM till it actually becomes a class?
It varies, but I've seen it last. It's taken 3 years to get our court reporting from the time we did the DACM to when we actually offered it. If it was even 3, it might have been 4. Other times it takes. Well, you do the DACM, then you have to develop the curriculum, then it has to go through a curriculum approval here at the college, and then it has to go to ICCB for their approval. So it takes at least, if you're effective and can develop it fairly quickly, I would say it takes at least a year to get it through all the steps internally for the process of being able to offer that curriculum.
And the number I've heard has even been 18 months is the minimum.
But then think about how much technology and careers change in that 18 months time frame. I mean,
you're almost falling behind before you even get it going.
Right.
Yeah, maybe not as much with court reporting, but I'm thinking, industrial maintenance, just how much by the time that we are in purchasing equipment that we can use to support curriculum, by the time we go through the process and we get the dollars procured to purchase something, that technology is already obsolete.
Yeah.
So in our last minute or so, would you say that the common themes that that this survey had are accurate?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a lot more conversation around those themes,
Yes.
but as a whole, those are big themes that are impacting.
I think they're directly impacting how we educate our new workers, how we educate our youth. And we need to do a lot of more thinking about how to be more effective at developing our workforce.
I would also like to just add, while these themes have been identified and we've had conversation around them, that there also has to be a willingness of people who make decisions and people who make rules to look at things from a different perspective. And some of that is missing in some conversations. I think, you get in those conversations of, well, it used to be this way, or this is the way we've always done it, versus it can be a tough pill to swallow sometimes when a 20-year-old comes to you and says, why don't we try it this way?
Yep.
For somebody like myself that's middle-aged, sometimes that's a tough pill to swallow. So there has to be a willingness on the part of those decision makers or managers to be thinking and accepting of new ideas as well.
And I agree. And I think the whole reason that we looked at the IMA Education Foundation report was so that we get that conversation started, that we can actually start making the changes that need to happen. And I thank you so much for being here today, Lynn and Bonnie. We've been friends for a long time.
Yes, we
have. And so it's
been
great.
great.
We've talked about doing a podcast before. So this has been great to actually make it happen. And thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank
You
you.
too. Thanks.